I guess rising tides, or I'm messing up the phrase, but rises all ships, or the rising tides rise all ships. But to me, it means, the better I do, the better you do, the better our students do, right? And the minute I stop growing is the minute our students stop growing. And we run a school in the North Lawndale neighborhood. North Lawndale is growing, it's vibrant, but it couldn't grow and it couldn't be vibrant if our school didn't play its part. And that is, we educate students so they come to us because they shouldn't have to leave the neighborhood to go find high quality education. But then when they leave us, they should be able to buy a home in the neighborhood. They should be able to work in the neighborhood, invest in the neighborhood. And so I feel like we are one small part of an ecosystem that together, if we do the work, if we get it right, together we all rise.
We were talking about the perspective of being somebody who stands up for the rights of others. And in moments like this, the burden is so heavy because it almost feels like, I'm not trying to say this in a negative way, but we have to show up for other people so often that often it feels like we're not even giving ourselves the time to be able to breathe and feel these emotions like we talked about when we first got started here. Do you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yes.
It's just like, It's such a complicated time.
Yes, that we wake up post-election or post-big event and we say, what are the people around me going to need? Mm-hmm. Before we say, what do I need to do this work? It's, I'll worry about myself after I make sure that everyone else is okay. And can I just say, I don't know, I know it's a wide audience, but a show I love, and I know everybody, people don't know I am in Chicago, and so I love Chicago PD.
Yeah.
And that's my show. But there was an episode I was watching recently, and one of their teammates was killed, and throughout the episode, they were still looking for the killer. There was like a kidnap situation, and they kept saying, feel it later. Feel it later. And I think that's how I wake up sometimes. It's like, feel it later. I don't have time to feel it. I have to solve this problem, or I have to go towards the action. And then maybe when I get a break, and who knows when that will be, a month from now?
We don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I was talking to another leader, and we were talking about the idea of compartmentalization, taking the feelings that we have here in this moment, putting them on the shelf, right? Healthy compartmentalization means I can separate myself from this moment and go about what I need to do, but I also have to come back when the time is right for me and open up that bottle to be able to feel those emotions. Now, I feel like with so many people, especially in this digital world that we live in, where there's always something else to do, we're always busy doing something, a lot of our shelves end up being so stacked up that we don't want to go back to those feelings, because how do we have the space to be able to actually let ourselves breathe in that moment and experience that emotion? And this is a really scary part, because what ends up happening is we end up with an empty cup, and we're trying to pour into other people, and we can't pour into other people.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think one of the most important things that we can do in this work is to know that, and then to build in the time to get what we need. And so for me, I build in therapy time. I know I just spoke with someone else who said they build in meditation, like partner meditation. And even if it's just an hour, to say, this is the time that is dedicated for me to unload or to take something off the shelf. And it's not everything at all times, but maybe the highest priority or the heaviest feeling or emotion or feeling or compartmentalization, then I think that allows us to lead better.
Yeah. How do you systematically and intentionally create space for yourself as a leader? I'm really interested in this topic because a lot of people who have on the podcast often really struggle with the element of, giving out so much of ourselves to other people that we don't intentionally block off that space so we can rebuild ourselves on a weekly basis or even a daily basis. So how do you kind of tackle that challenge?
So I don't know that I don't know if I actually, let me think. I would say, I don't know if I get to it daily, but maybe I do. Maybe I do sometimes. And it's just this 30-minute routine for myself in my bath or shower. That's that. Like, I have to clean myself, so why not? But on a big picture, I do a couple of things. I'm not the best at it all the time, but I do try to every 6 weeks block off my calendar. And it just says hold, like hold for space. And it's just there on the calendar in case I need the space. So I try not to schedule any meeting on that day at least. So then when I get to it, or on the week before and I'm looking at the next week, I can say, oh, look at that. I didn't schedule a meeting because I have this
Little
whole
vacation.
space. Yes, yes. And then I put up an away message to let people know when I'll get back to them. And even though it's every 6 weeks, it doesn't happen every 6 weeks. But even though, it might be every 12 weeks, but at least I have it built in somewhere.
You almost have like a mental carrot that when times are tough, I just had to push through this next couple of weeks before I got my block day.
Yes, yes. And it doesn't typically fall on the same holidays that everybody else takes, That's what I learned in the work too. I was like, oh, days that other people get off, I don't get those days off. So let me go ahead and block some time for myself. And like you said, mental care that I forget about.
Mm-hmm. I just feel like, especially leaders who are doing such fundamental work in the space of inspiring the next generation, right? It's so easy for us to get lost in the hustle, in the busy trap of always trying to pour into others. And I love being able to dive into these areas on the conversation and the podcast is because unless our leaders can be vulnerable enough to show that this time is necessary, it's easy for us to get caught up in the facade that just because we're at the top of an organization means that we don't deal with these type of challenges. And so I really appreciate your willingness to kind of share your space with us and kind of how you kind of navigate this stuff. It's super important.
Yeah. Something I tell my team, my immediate team, is that I need them to model taking time off, and that we don't need to be heroes in the sense of, oh, I've taken a day off and now I'm going to also show up for this meeting, or that I have to model right now that I work all of the time. And I do think in this fast-paced world, I think, like you said, internet, social media, just things that didn't exist before, there's almost accolades in feeling like you're on all the time, or the perception that other people think that you're on all the time.
It's like a social badge almost.
Yeah. And I've had to check myself on it too, because I believe even in the highest roles at times, it can look like you're not doing anything because my work doesn't look like someone else's work on a daily basis. And so sometimes I feel like I need to prove to people that I am working just as hard as they are. And that also can cause burnout. And so I said, you know what? I need to prove to people that I also rest, and let me model that. And I need the rest of my team to prove to people that they rest. And when we say that it's a day off, let people actually have their day off. And when we say that they're sick, let people actually be sick. And actually, if I'm going to be personal for a second here with you, if it's okay, I feel like I don't want to mess up the podcast. You can edit me, but
No, you're good.
But we were scheduled to talk, weeks ago, and I couldn't make it. But how hard it was for me to say I can't make it, because for all I know, you're gonna say that we missed it. Oh, she's unreliable, whatever it is, right? All the mental things that go into trying to show up for someone else, or the perception that you have of someone else. But I couldn't make it because I'm pregnant. And because I'm pregnant, sometimes there are limitations on what I am able to do physically. And I needed to go to the doctor. And really, I even feel like I shouldn't have to share that. I should feel confident just saying I can't make it today. But for the sake of this story, I'm saying we should not feel in our society like we must prove that we're always working minute to minute. And if we're not working, it's because we're sick, and there's no in between.
Dude, I mean, like that hits heavy for me because I always feel like I'm the person who has to be there 24/7, up before everybody else, logging off after everyone else does as well, right? The keeper of the castle. But I thought when you reached out to me and were like, hey, I'm not going to be able to make it, I was like, a symbol of strength because this person's respecting their time, right? And if they can't make it, that's okay. It's like I am not the person who holds you accountable to making sure you're showing up as the best person you are. You are. And if you have to take time to step away and then come back so we can do this like we're doing today, it was obviously meant to be. But that experience of having to justify ourselves to other people is a scary one. And I feel like we spend a lot more time doing that than justifying to ourselves why we need to be able to take time off and just be true to ourselves more often. Does that make sense?
Yes. And it hits home. I was like, that was perfectly said. Perfect. I'm like, oh, preach today to me. Talk to me.
One thing that I thought was really important, and it kind of goes in line with what we're talking about here, is you said you guys have a phrase, which is a philosophy more so, which is together we rise. Why do you have that philosophy, and what does that mean?
Yeah, that means that, I guess rising tides, or I'm messing up the phrase, but rises all ships, or the rising tides rise all ships. But to me, it means, the better I do, the better you do, the better our students do, right? And the minute I stop growing is the minute our students stop growing. And, we run a school in the North Lawndale neighborhood. North Lawndale is growing, it's vibrant. But it couldn't grow and it couldn't be vibrant if our school didn't play its part. And that is, we educate students so they come to us because they shouldn't have to leave the neighborhood to go find high quality education. But then when they leave us, they should be able to buy a home in the neighborhood. They should be able to work in the neighborhood, invest in the neighborhood. And so I feel like we are one small part of an ecosystem that together, if we do the work, if we get it right, together we all rise. And so that's how I see it. So I think it's small inside our building, our students, our teachers, what we do here, our students do better, I do better. But then if North Lawndale does better, North Lawndale rises, and this is a predominantly Black neighborhood in the city of Chicago, then the city of Chicago does better.
I think about the pivotal role that schools play in our lives. Very transparently, I'm going a little bit of soapbox here. During the pandemic, right, all the kids are home from school. What happens? Parents start losing their fucking minds because it's so tough to take care of these kids. They're distracting me all day. And in that moment, I had a realization of, shouldn't we be appreciating the role that these educators, these institutions in our community play towards raising the children in our community? Like, what a fundamental cornerstone of our community. But yet it seems like they are not as appreciated as they should be. Why do you think that we keep fucking that up?
I think we take schools and educators for granted. I think it is, I heard something somewhere where everyone thinks that they can run a school or a restaurant because everybody's been there. And I was
So
like,
true.
that is so true, right? It's like, yeah, I went to school for this many years. Of course I know, until you're on the other side to find out what actually goes into running a school and educating kids and making these institutions safe and also full of knowledge and to care for kids. And I do think it's just this idea of like, well, I went to school, so I know what it takes to do this, and what we should be doing, without actually knowing everything that goes into the educational process.
What do you think about the responsibility, especially in a city like Chicago, right, that schools play in creating and cultivating a safe space? Because if I think about, very transparently, I'm not talking like negatively at all about Chicago, but the media does an amazing job at making this sound like one of the most dangerous places in the world to be. And when I think about specifically African American culture, often education is looked at as kind of like a secondary. And when we think about the enablement platform that puts people in opportunities, right, to explore and be curious and create an opportunity for them to impact their community, it often starts in the school. So how do you think about the responsibility to be that culture and that cornerstone of your community?
Yeah, it's something that's fundamental to our school and our organization. And so something we call it is Phoenix Rising. So our mascot is the Phoenix, but we call it Phoenix Rising, and it's college, career, and Chicago. And that by the time our students graduate, they will have had significant exposure to college, to career opportunities, and Chicago. And I'm like, that means our students have to leave their neighborhood. It is our responsibility to take them out of the neighborhood, to see the north side of Chicago, the south side, the lake, because if they don't feel like this is their city, then why would I take care of it, right? If I don't have a stake in this, if I can't explore this place, and if this place doesn't feel like it is mine and it is my home, then sure, why not? Why not go get into some debauchery? But I really think that is our responsibility as educators. And I think some schools have the resources and the abilities to say we can afford to let our students explore. And I think there are other schools who feel like we don't have that, because this is because we have to make sure that we're getting our students caught up to grade level, or providing what they don't have academically. And I think the place where I see education and where we live is it's both. We can't take one or the other. We can't negate one for the other, because where students and young people spend most of their hours.
Yes. And that's why I wanted to go back to the element of saying that, like, the education experience, right? Your guys' institution is a cornerstone of life. We spend so much time from wake up to go to sleep, from most of our prevalent years, 15 to 18 years old, where we're spending time in these spaces. When you mentioned something about catching people up, I'm really interested. Being a CEO of a college preparatory school, right? How much catching up are we having to do with this younger generation coming out of the pandemic? Are you guys still seeing like major impacts, or like what's like the real going on inside of like the youth and the education experience?
Yeah, so across the city, we're doing a pretty good job catching students up, but the reality is the pandemic put students behind in ways that we're going to see for a while. And it's not just academically, it's social and emotionally. It is when you don't have really anybody to interact with, or someone to help model positive interactions. When you get back together with your peers, it is, oh, well, now I don't actually know how to have a proper conversation, or I don't know how to control my feelings or my anger. And so what we saw post-pandemic is a lot of schools providing a lot of extra social emotional learning support, right? And tackling the social emotional needs before we started tackling the academic losses.
And what does that look like?
Yeah, so rebuilding community. So again, if you think that your school is community, And, this is where you spend most of your hours, and then someone takes that away. It's like, how do you build that back? How do you bring your family back together? What North Lawndale College Prep was able to do, and my predecessor was able to do, was she kept the school open. Now, we weren't open every day, but when most schools were closed during the pandemic, we did staggered schedules so that our students wouldn't fully lose the community, but it still wasn't the same as being able to say, I'm here 5 days a week with my full class. And then bringing students back when everybody was able to come back, it was a lot of check-ins. How are you feeling? How are you doing? Can we get you hooked up with an intervention if you're not feeling well? Can we do more team building so that you get to know your peers? All of those things to be able to get to a place where now everybody's ready to learn.
Wasn't it interesting? When I was going through my high school experience, so 2006 through 2009, right? I feel incredibly senior now. We always thought that there's no way that we should have to come to school every single day, especially with computers and the ability to kind of do like virtual rooms and XYZ. That stuff was just starting to come into the world. We always thought there was an opportunity for you to just do school remotely, 100%. And we're like, there's not going to be any impact on my life in general. I just won't have to spend time here. But now when we get kids into that scenario, we realize that it was so corrosive on their humanistic elements of being able to be a person that it seems like it's really scary, and also puts institutions like you guys in a situation where you have to dump a ton of resources to round out these human beings to be able to go out into the world and impact their community.
Yeah. Socially, teenagers, their brains, they need to connect with one another. And so it is, when you see the kids, especially like the girls on the phone, or they're on the phone at night, it's like, because our brains are wired to be in groups. We want to be around people. And that was lost. And so I don't ever see there being a world where you can just do everything online, because you miss the human connection. And what you also miss is the body language and the nuance of being in person. And I think even us doing this, there's only so much I can see, right? And there's only so much you can see of me, but is my body turned? Are my legs crossed in a way? What does a head down look like? And I think, I also have kids at home, so I was part of the watching this remote learning. There's only so much you can do with somebody who's on a screen, whereas teachers are taught even body proximity is a way to get a student engaged. So if your head is down right now, there's only so many times I can say, Keenan, tap, 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 or you're asleep, versus me standing next to you, or, coming over and maybe putting a Post-it note on your desk to check in. Like, those connections, those small pieces were lost and would be lost if we completely went digital.
So are we saying that the answer to to preventing social isolation and loneliness is not social media? Is that what we're trying to say here? Is this like what you're trying to cue at a little bit?
I think we have to be together. How do we get groups? Because why do all those people run a marathon? That sounds terrible to me. I'm sorry.
It does sound terrible.
What? It's like, why? Even though it's an individual sport, often people do it in groups, right? Mm-hmm. Like you're running together. You want to be connected with someone. There's only so much you can get from social media, from the internet, from texting. You want that proximity with people.
Do you ever get worried about how quickly social media has kind of shaped our worldview? As an example, when I was going through high school, right, feelings of comparison, right, were based on my local community, aka the kids who went to my high school, the kids who I could see in the parking lot, maybe the kids who were in school districts around me who we spent time with. Now, we live in this world, especially everybody younger, lives in a global community. And I don't think we can truly understand the impacts in living in a global community via access on our devices to our mental health and the way in which we look at even social interactions. I could never compare myself to kids who lived in Miami. I could never compare myself to people who live in Dubai. But today, those are all the type of images that people see on social media. So as a leader of an institution, do you ever worry about that impact on the mindset of younger kids when they're comparing themselves to the world instead of people in their high school?
All the time. All the time. I am hard pressed. It's a hot take, but I am hard pressed to see why children need cell phones. Because living in a global society, I think, is absolutely fabulous. I think learning, studying abroad, learning from other people who are different than you, diversity, I think we will have such a robust tapestry as the generations grow. But on the flip side, it is, one, it's the comparison, but two, it's the addiction. And I just think things are faster moving for our kids in a way that is stopping them from being able to be kids. Just the play, the outside, the hobbies, this conversation about social interaction, and do you get it from social media, is, well, what else would you be doing if you didn't have a phone or technology? You would actually physically go to someone and go play a sport, or just go hang out, or sit somewhere and chat. And so to your point about the comparison, I think there's comparison in isolation, and there's only so much of that that's going to make you a better person before it starts to just make you feel bad about yourself.
Yeah.
And I think that going back to Together We Rise, now when we're together, me doing better means that I get to lift you up, and you doing better lifts me up, because we're physically in it together.
A really important element, which I think is important for us to hammer home here. This is a thought experiment, okay? What do you think would happen to our communities if, in a best practice world, there was a digital apocalypse where all social media disappeared off of our phones? Instagram didn't work, Facebook didn't work, TikTok, Snapchat, all these different type of things, but we could still text and call each other. How do you think interactions would change amongst people who are younger specifically? What do you think they'd be doing over those couple years?
Good thought experiment. I just think after the initial freak out, right? I think they would text and call each other to go hang out in person. Right? I just think, like, what else would you do?
Exactly. We were talking about this in a group the other night, and we were talking about this specifically because people in my generation, specifically millennials, I've seen a prevalence of a conscious choice to stop being on social platforms, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, all of these things, and literally leaning into our social networks, aka our friends, and going to meet people in person. I have gone through places where I've struggled with my mental health because I've found myself naturally going to a place of comparison, because the images that I see on social platforms, because I'm a business guy, entrepreneur, I see people who share their stories, which are often fictional, where they're talking about how much money they're making at the age of 23. And like, I live in Miami, I've got this high rise, blah, blah, blah. I'm making $100,000 a day, XYZ. And I started realizing that it started degrading my personal self-esteem, because I was comparing myself to somebody who I've never met, somebody who I will never know, and somebody who I'll never interact with. And I feel like a lot of people are swinging the pendulum back in that direction. I'm not sure if you've ever had the urge to do those things yourself, or if you have anybody else in your life who's also thought about that.
To get off of social media. Yeah, I will say, if I'm thinking about myself, the positive of social media is I am able to connect with people who I would never meet in real life had I not met them on social media, or keep in touch with people who I would have never kept in touch with, just because of what it takes to make a phone call or schedule, and now all of a sudden I get to see someone's lives. Um, but I'm sure there's a phrase for it, but basically I think I just curate my social media so it only gives me things that are going to bring me joy, and blocks out everything else. Um, but I had to get to this point too, because you're right. When you're doing almost anything, there's always seemingly somebody who's doing it better. and and when it's somebody who's doing it better and you don't know them and you can't talk to them and you don't see their struggle, then I look at myself like, oh, how come they can do it? Perfect example. For being pregnant. I am struggling through this pregnancy. People make fun of me a little bit because they're like, girl, you got like 3 more months to go. I was like, I know. And this baby is kicking my behind, right? But when I go on social media, then I see other pregnant women. They look great.
Photo shoots, hanging out,
Yes.
chilling.
Dancing. I'm like, I could barely walk down the hallway without someone asking if I'm okay. And and it's funny, but I actually started to internalize that a little bit, like I'm doing pregnancy wrong because I can't keep up, and maybe I didn't do what I was supposed to do. Um, yeah, to be able to carry this baby with the correct energy, and but back at you, because where I feel is like, then I feel like it becomes my responsibility to lend my voice to say, hey, this thing is hard. Let me try to be on social media as the opposite voice of somebody who doesn't have it all together, even if you think I do, kind of thing. And I'm wondering if there's a place for that, because I do find positivity on social media if I can see examples of people, particularly who are in a situation like mine or who look like me, killing it, you know? So I wonder about that for you.
I mean, I think that it's interesting to me because when I do observe social media, I've seen a pattern that started to emerge in front of me, which is you're always going to have people who are going to fake it till they make it, right? But it's the people who are often more transparent about their struggles and what they're trying to accomplish that seem like they get genuine admiration and encouragement from the social ecosphere. And I feel like that is a sign of subconsciously we are yearning in our lives for people to be real, more so now than ever. And that's why they get so much traction on social media. I'll give you an example. There was this young kid who I saw on Instagram maybe 4 or 5 months ago. And he was really getting into the ice bath process. And he was like, it's day 1 of sitting in an ice bath. And it's this younger kid. He's like a little bit chunkier. And he was just like so genuine and making his video, close it down. Kept doing that for a full year. And by the end of it, he had like 1 million followers. And in the comments, it was just people being like, you got this, man, keep going. And I was like, why is it that we can show up as this genuine, encouraging version of ourselves for people who are doing what they want to do rather than faking it? It just seems like the playbook is right in front of us, but we continue to try and be copy and paste versions of other people, if that makes sense.
It was easier to be the copy paste version or attempt to be the few stars you saw on TV. But now anybody can be a star and anybody can be an influencer. And I think that that's also what I'm watching with my own girls at home and some of the young women. There's almost like more examples to attain to, and they're not all positive. Whereas I think what I used to get out of at least watching TV is I feel like it was more curated. Mm-hmm. You know, it was more, there are certain things that weren't going to be shown on TV. You know, more censored in a way. And look how old, you said it earlier, but I'm like, oh, look how old I sound. Censor that TV. But, you know, but there is a part, because now my older eyes are like, it's too much. It's too much input, and it's too much to try to discern when you're a child of what is right, what is wrong. Who am I supposed to be? How do I find my own identity if I'm just copying someone else's identity?
There's a trend that I saw on social media maybe like 6 months ago. You ever heard of a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk? Gary V on social media?
Oh yeah, yep.
Okay, so Gary V, in some of his content, he always talks about when he was a younger kid, 7, 8 years old, whatever, he had a real affinity for going up to people in the park in New York, right? In Jersey or whatever, and talking to the elderly people and asking them questions about their life and asking them, what are some of the biggest regrets that you have? And often the regrets that these people had was, first of all, not taking the chance, not believing in myself, and trying to be a version of myself that I truly wasn't. And it seems like there's an underlying message of authenticity in there that when you get to the end of your days, you're going to wish that you were more of yourself in getting there. And I often think about that today because we have an opportunity to morph and shift and code switch, if you will, with people in every different scenario, especially as leaders. But when we start to get more comfortable in our skin, it's interesting to see how people show up more of themselves because they have a track record of being successful and being able to deliver results, not just how they're dressed. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I love that, and I think it's, and I think sometimes you can't. So back to the social media piece, I think as a young person, if you look at yourself when you were younger, I look at myself when I was younger, there's only so much you can tell a young person. And age and wisdom hopefully come together at the same time where you recognize something like that, like, oh, I wish I was more of myself. And I don't believe that it is our job to dictate the journey of children per se, but I do believe it is our job to help them not veer so off course that they never can get to a place where they have these realizations when they're older.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so what you just said, it resonates me, or what Gary said, because I think some of the ways that you find yourself is through your community. And to your point, if your community is everything and everybody, then how are you finding yourself through that? Because part of the way you find it, from younger, especially at the teenage years, because the teenage years are where you start to break apart from your nuclear family to try to explore who you want to be as an individual before you come back to your family, as an adult self. And if you have an example of what you want to be without any real feedback from these people about who you actually are, if your social circle is not a real circle, then you're only getting the outputs. You're not getting any input for yourself, and real-time feedback.
Have you ever heard the science behind why it is as young tweens and teenagers we start resisting our nucleus family and we start looking for other examples of people who we can look up to?
I don't know if I've heard the science, the brain.
So this is really interesting. So in our DNA, we have a trigger that says when we become a mature age where we can start reproducing, and that's younger and younger every single year, we start looking at our parents as being stupid. But rather, that's because that is actually a scientific, genetic, I would say, deterrent from inbreeding. So you're supposed to look at your parents as people who are stupid and you shouldn't listen to them. And that's why if you have a tight community of friends and often you listen to their parents, where you'll say something to your kid and say, you shouldn't do that. And they say, Mom, you don't know what you're talking about. But then they go talk to somebody else's mom and they say, you shouldn't do that. And they're like, well, I obviously shouldn't do that. That makes a lot of sense. It's really interesting how we have these genetic codes in our systems that will push us away from our nucleus, our nuclear family, and start pushing us into the community. And that's why it's so important that we have well-rounded, responsible, empathetic, compassionate adults in our lives who can be that sounding board, a voice that we don't want to hear from mom and dad. Mm-hmm. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah. I had not heard that part. That'll help me in my own teenage years. But it goes back to why I think schools as an institution are so important. So important. Let alone these middle school, high school, where now that I know that there's actual science that the brain is telling you need to do this. You want to be able to trust where you're sending your kids and who you're sending them to and the examples that they have. And I think when we're tying it back to social media, I don't trust everybody on social media. I don't trust every image. And I think it's getting harder to discern what is real and what's not. And it's also why I feel the college prep education is so important, because when I hear college prep and what we offer is we're offering critical thinking and questioning, why is this? Is this real? Is this, is this thing that I'm seeing actually the thing, or is there something behind it? And do I know how to research and fact check? I think the more that we are in the digital age, the more that fact checking and research is important, and being able to question and have conversations and critical conversations is going to be so important as a cornerstone for our youth.
How do you think about the future? So I was listening to a podcast. I'll give some context to what do you think about the future. I was listening to this guy. He was number 12, I think, at Facebook. He's a big investor now, multi-billionaire. And he was talking about the advent of artificial intelligence, right? When I came through school, it was, if you have a research paper, you need to go to the library, go to the Dewey Decimal System, find your book, bring it back, cite it, put it into the report, XYZ. Students today have unlimited access to information at their fingertips through large language models and ChatGPT and AI. One of the comments that this guy was making, in the future, when our society catches up to having the understanding that you have unlimited good information at your fingertips, our teachers are going to become cornerstones of our society and the highest regard. Why? Because they're going to be teaching students how to think about their problems. Not just go down this path and do this protocol, these steps, but how are we going to get creative in gathering all of our resources to tackle this problem, to attack this challenge? What do you think about the role of the teacher in being the formulator of how people think about these problems rather than just how to get things done?
I 100% agree. And that, even back to my comment about college, it's like, I believe it's the teacher's job to help our students think, and even our curriculum, the way that we're doing things in education, Chicago public schools, our school, everything still builds on, here's the foundational learning, but then how do you get your students to talk with one another? What is the protocol that they use to agree, disagree, build on one another's thoughts, and problem solve, and come to a conclusion or a solution? And I don't think that's ever going away. And it probably is more important than ever now, as AI can shoot out any answer for anything. And I want our kids to be able to push back or question and say, do I believe this to be true? If something that comes to mind from a time when we were younger is, remind me where you grew up. What city?
I grew up in Detroit, Michigan.
Okay, so 100% you're going to follow this. I didn't always trust the weatherman, and I was fooled to do so. You give me the information that I need. You tell me it's going to be warm today. I'm still going to bring a jacket. Until you show me a bunch of days in a row and I can confirm for myself that it is warm, I'm bringing my winter jacket. You know what I mean? Because I can't be outside cold. Yeah. Or you say it's not going to snow and I didn't wear the right boots, and I just feel like that was like our form of AI or whatever it is.
That really was our critical thinking test. It really was. You can't trust Al Roker. He's not going to tell you what's going on in your city or your neck of the woods.
Correct. They say they're going to, but how many times have I walked outside and it started raining and y'all told me it was going to be sunny, right? So I have to look at the clouds for myself and be able to put together, I hear what you're saying, but let me think this through for my own reality.
That's an amazing analogy. I'm bringing that into all my conversations in the future. That's a really good one. I love that. Here's another question for you. Today, after we hop off this podcast, you are met by an incredibly friendly individual, and they give you a package, and they say, inside this package is a time machine. You can go back in time to any point in your life and have a conversation for 5 minutes with a younger version of yourself. What advice would you give to that younger version of yourself that would help them navigate the time between then and us sitting here today? What advice would you give to that person?
What a good question. I would tell myself that there are more women of color and girls of color who are going to do great things and that are going to be leaders, and that the examples that you have now don't scratch the surface. And so so the people that I think it goes back to comparison. I think I tell myself the people you're trying to emulate now are not your people. They're not the right people. And you just don't have enough examples right now of what you could be and what you could do. And I think that if I look back at myself, I'm like, that would have helped me, because I had a very different vision of who was supposed to be in charge, who's supposed to be a leader, what smart looks like. I told myself, you're smart, you're beautiful, you're great. You're not in a time right now where any of that is appreciated.
But man, what a tough pill to swallow when we're younger, right? Thinking that we have the world figured out and recognizing that 3-4 years from now, life is going to change and take you in directions that you could never even fathom. It's a lesson that I think we all need to lean into a little bit more. Man. So one of the traditions that we have here on the podcast, as we kind of put the gears down to land, is our previous guest wanted to ask you a blind question. If you had unlimited resources and could work on one project for the rest of time, what would that be?
I think it would be what I'm doing now. I would be working to educate as many Black and brown children as I can, and to get them in a place where they have access to college and beyond and critical thinking skills to be able to be resilient in whatever comes in the world.
Well, it's easy to understand why you are the definition of Hart and Hustle and why we had you on the podcast here today. This has been an incredible conversation, and I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, and for everybody else who's tuning in, watching, and listening today. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
And that's a wrap.